cabin of United Airlines Flight 2247 is eerily quiet for a Tuesday afternoon. 35,000 feet above the American Midwest, somewhere between the flat geometry of Kansas and the distant suggestion of the Rockies, 287 passengers sit suspended in a steel tube hurtling through thin air at 567 miles per hour. The Boeing 737-900ER cuts through a pale autumn sky, its twin CFM56 engines producing a low, constant hum that most frequent flyers learn to treat as white noise. Most of them are reading, sleeping, watching something on their phones with earbuds jammed in, tuned out from the world below. Nobody is tuned out in row 14. Something is happening in row 14 that has nothing to do with turbulence, nothing to do with weather, and nothing to do with anything the FAA has ever written a regulation for. What is happening in row 14 is a woman named Deborah Kellison, seat 14C, standing in the aisle of a pressurized cabin at cruising altitude and screaming. Not raising her voice, not speaking firmly, screaming. Her face has gone the particular shade of red that flight attendants recognize as a precursor to a medical event or a federal incident. And right now, on this flight with this woman, nobody is sure which one it is. She cannot sit here. Deborah is saying, loudly enough that passengers in row 20 have pulled out one earbud. I paid for this seat. I paid for this row. I specifically requested this row, and I will not sit next to a dog. I have a severe allergy. I have documentation. I have rights. The dog she is referring to is a small, immaculately trained golden retriever named Compass. Compass is lying completely still on the floor near the window seat, seat 14A. Compass is not barking. Compass is not moving. Compass has not made a single sound since the aircraft departed Chicago O'Hare 2 hours ago. Compass is, by any reasonable measure, the single best-behaved passenger on United Airlines Flight 2247. The girl Compass belongs to is 11 years old. Her name is Maya. She is sitting in seat 14A with her hands folded in her lap and her face turned slightly toward the window, though she cannot see the clouds outside. Maya has been blind since she was 4 years old. She has soft brown hair pulled into a braid, a lavender backpack, and the particular stillness of a child who has learned very early that the world will sometimes be unkind to her and that the best response is patience. Maya has not said a single word since Deborah Kellison began her performance. But what Deborah Kellison does not know yet, what 287 passengers on Flight 2247 do not know yet, what the 2 flight attendants approaching from the galley do not entirely know yet, is who Maya's father is, where he is right now, and what is about to happen when the door at the front of this aircraft swings open. Because right now, the door at the front of this aircraft is the cockpit door. And the man behind it has heard every single word. To understand how this moment came to exist at 35,000 feet, you have to go back 24 hours to a suburb of Denver, Colorado, where Maya and her father were packing for a trip that had been planned for 6 months. The trip was important. Not vacation important. Not casual important. The kind of important that doesn't fit in a suitcase. A medical consultation at a specialist hospital in Boston that Maya's father had spent 4 months trying to schedule. A pioneering ophthalmologist who had reviewed Maya's case and suggested there might be new options. New options. 2 words that had kept a man awake for 3 months and driven him to plan every detail of this trip with military precision. Maya's father is Captain Daniel Osei. He is 43 years old. He has been a commercial airline pilot for 16 years, the last 8 of them as a captain with United Airlines, where his record is spotless and his reputation among crew is that of a man who is calm in any situation, fair to a fault, and quietly commanding in a way that makes new first officers feel immediately safe. He has logged more than 12,000 flight hours. He has flown through weather systems that would make most people religious. He has landed aircraft in conditions that dispatchers apologize for assigning. He has never once raised his voice in a cockpit. He is a man who understands, in the cellular way that only pilots understand, that emotion and altitude are a dangerous combination. He had arranged the specifics of this particular flight with careful thought. Maya would be listed as an unaccompanied minor with a registered guide dog, Compass, whose certification documents are impeccable, updated, and as legitimate as any document in existence. Daniel would be operating Flight 2247 himself, His regular Denver to Boston rotation, which meant Maya would be in the cabin while he was in the cockpit, watched over by the crew he trusted on a plane he knew like the back of his hand. It was the safest possible arrangement. It was, he had told himself, perfect. He had walked Maya to row 14A himself before boarding began, gotten her settled, introduced her to senior flight attendant Carmen Reyes, explained Compass's behavior and certification, and then made his way to the cockpit to begin pre-flight checks. Maya had smiled and told him she was fine. She always said she was fine. Deborah Kellison did not board until Group 3. Deborah Kellison is 51 years old, a self-described platinum-level traveler who has filed 23 complaints with United Airlines in the past 4 years. 23. That number is not invented. It lives in a customer relations database alongside a notation that her complaints have been reviewed by a supervisor and that 7 of them were found to be without merit, for were resolved with small travel credits issued as goodwill gestures, and the remaining 12 are described in the file as escalated before being quietly archived. She is the kind of traveler that gate agents recognize on site and notify their colleagues about via the airline's internal messaging system. Not because she is dangerous, because she is exhausting. She has complained about seat width, legroom, temperature, other passengers' perfume, a child's iPad screen brightness, a man's cologne, a woman's knitting needles, and on one memorable occasion the specific sound of another passenger chewing. She once demanded that a gate agent be fired because the gate agent had smiled at her in what she described as a condescending way. She has 6 United travel credits she has never used because redeeming them would require her to have a positive interaction with customer service, and she has decided as a matter of principle to be unsatisfied. She chose seat 14C deliberately. She had seen the seat map and noted that 14A and 14B were selected by a single passenger. Unusual, suggesting either a couple or, as she suspected when she noticed the service animal icon on the booking, someone with a disability. Deborah does not dislike disabled people, she would tell you. She simply believes that her comfort is not something that should be compromised by anyone else's circumstances. She has this belief written in the marrow of her bones. It has never once been challenged in a way that left a mark. At the check-in counter at Denver International, she had already begun. The agent, a young man named Trevor who was 22 years old and 8 months into the job, had been questioned about why her seat had been changed from 14C to 16C in a system update, despite the fact that this change had occurred because of a standard aircraft swap 2 days earlier and had nothing to do with the passenger in 14A. Trevor had explained this 4 times. Deborah had said, each time with increasing volume, that she wanted her original seat. Trevor had restored it. He had done this because it was easier. He would later tell his supervisor he felt he had no choice. She had boarded and settled into 14C and not noticed Compass immediately because Compass was lying quietly under the seat in front of 14A. When she saw the dog, she had first turned to Maya and said, "Is that a real dog?" Maya had said yes. Deborah had then pulled out her phone and began composing a complaint to United Airlines through their app, while simultaneously signaling for a flight attendant. Flight attendant Carmen Reyes, 11 years with United, had come to row 14 and listened to Deborah's allergy claim with practiced patience. She had asked if Deborah had a documented allergy on file. Deborah had said she didn't need it on file. She was telling her now. Carmen had explained that registered guide dogs cannot be removed from the cabin under federal law, specifically the Air Carrier Access Act, and that the dog was certified and legally present. Deborah had told Carmen that she needed to speak with a supervisor. Carmen had explained there was no supervisor in the cabin. She was the senior flight attendant. She was the supervisor. Deborah had said that wasn't good enough. This exchange had occurred on the ground at the gate before pushback. The aircraft had departed anyway because federal law does not accommodate Deborah Kellison's preferences, and because the dog had documentation and the passenger did not, and because every protocol had been followed. Deborah had spent the first 2 hours of the flight in a state of aggressive silence, the specific kind that radiates hostility like a space heater. She had complained that the air vent above 14C smelled different from the others. She had asked Carmen to check if the dog had fleas. She had turned to the man in 14D and told him she thought it was outrageous that this was being allowed. The man in 14D had put his earbuds in without responding. And then, at the 2-hour mark, Something had shifted in Deborah Kellison. Perhaps it was the third small bottle of Chardonnay. Perhaps it was the particular calculation of a person who has never faced real consequences and therefore no longer believes they exist. She had leaned across the empty seat 14B and said something to Maya that Carmen Reyes, standing near the galley, did not hear clearly. Maya had said nothing back. Whatever Deborah had said, it had been enough to make the 11-year-old girl's hands grip the armrests of seat 14A. Compass had lifted his head. Carmen had been walking back toward row 14 when the volume began escalating, and what she had heard when she arrived, what had made her press the call button for her colleague, Flight Attendant James Okafor, and simultaneously reach for the interphone handset, was Deborah Kellison standing in the aisle, pointing at Compass, pointing at Maya, and saying things that a flight attendant with 11 years of experience does not often hear in a pressurized cabin. This animal should be in cargo. Deborah is saying now, loud enough for 6 rows in every direction to hear. She doesn't need it. She's not even that blind. She can see fine. You can see fine, can't you? Stop pretending. The cabin goes very quiet. Not the white noise quiet of cruising altitude. A different kind of quiet. The held breath quiet of 287 people suddenly paying complete attention. Heads turn. A woman in row 12 leans into the aisle. A man in row 16 pulls out both earbuds. 3 rows back, a college-aged kid slowly raises his phone. Maya does not respond. Maya is sitting with her hands in her lap and her face is very still, and she is doing the thing she has learned to do, the thing her father taught her, the thing that costs her more than anyone watching will ever understand. She is being patient with a world that has decided not to be patient with her. Carmen steps into the aisle. "Ma'am, I need you to return to your seat." Deborah turns to Carmen with the expression of someone who has been waiting for this moment. "I need you to have this dog removed. I have an allergy. I have rights. This girl does not need this animal and I am going to be very sick. Do you understand what liability means? Do you want United Airlines to be sued?" "The dog is a registered guide animal," Carmen says. Her voice is professionally level. "It cannot be removed. You need to return to your seat. Then move me. Move me to first class. First class is full, ma'am. Then bump someone. That's not possible. Then this flight needs to land." The words land in the cabin like something dropped from height. A few passengers exchange looks. An older woman in row 11 shakes her head. The college kid's phone is definitely recording now. Deborah has said the thing that changes the category of this situation. She has introduced, however theatrically, the idea of an emergency. And on a commercial aircraft at cruising altitude, that word carries weight that Deborah Kellison does not fully understand. Carmen reaches for the interphone. In the cockpit, Captain Daniel Osei is monitoring the flight management system when the call comes through. His first officer, a capable young man named Marcus Webb, watches him pick up the handset. Daniel listens. His face, from the outside, does not change. His voice, when he responds, is the same voice he uses for everything in this cockpit, even and precise. "What is the passenger's behavior level?" he asks. Carmen gives him the assessment. She uses the code language that crew use, the language that doesn't alarm other passengers through a thin cockpit door. Daniel listens to every word. He asks one question, "Is Maya okay?" There is a pause on the line that lasts perhaps 3 seconds. "She hasn't said anything," Carmen says carefully. "She seems frightened." The line is quiet for a moment. Marcus Webb is watching his captain's face. He will later tell investigators that he saw something shift in Daniel's expression. Not anger. Exactly. Something quieter and more absolute than anger. The look of a man who has made a decision. "I'm coming out," Daniel says. Marcus sits up straighter. This is not standard. A captain does not leave the cockpit mid-flight except under specific circumstances, and a passenger dispute, even an escalating one, is not typically among them. "Sir," he says. "You have the aircraft," Daniel says. "I'll be brief. The FAA does allow a captain to exit the cockpit under certain circumstances, including situations involving the safety and welfare of passengers." Daniel has made his determination. He presses the interphone to notify Carmen. He stands. He adjusts his uniform, the 4 gold stripes on his epaulets catching the cockpit light, and he opens the cockpit door. The effect is immediate and total. When the cockpit door of a commercial aircraft opens mid-flight and a captain walks out, something changes in the cabin atmosphere. It is not something any passenger can articulate precisely. It is a shift in gravity. A reminder of the hierarchy of this particular world, that above 35,000 feet, the captain of an aircraft has authority that supersedes almost everything, including the preferences of a woman in seat 14C. Deborah Kellison is mid-sentence when she sees him. She sees the uniform first, the 4 stripes, the captain's hat he carries in one hand, the expression on his face that is not angry and is not warm and is something she has never directed at her before. Something that communicates, without any ambiguity, that he is aware of every word she has said in the last 2 hours, and that he has arrived to address them. She sees him walk down the aisle toward row 14. She sees him stop at the aisle seat of row 14, reach across, and rest one hand gently on Maya's shoulder. She sees the girl turn her face toward him and say, "Dad." The cabin does not erupt immediately. There is instead a second of perfect silence as 287 people and 1 flight attendant and 1 increasingly pale Deborah Kellison process what they have just witnessed. The captain of the aircraft, the blind girl, the word dad, the 4 gold stripes, and then, like a wave that starts at the back of a beach and doesn't stop, the cabin fills with sound. Daniel does not look at Deborah. Not yet. He crouches beside Maya's seat, speaks to her quietly, checks on compass, and his voice is everything in the cockpit, even and low and steady. Maya says something back. He nods. He straightens. And then he turns to Deborah Kellison. "I'm Captain Daniel Osei," he says. "This is my aircraft. And that is my daughter." Deborah's mouth is open. No sound is coming out. Her face has traveled through red and arrived somewhere paler. She is standing in the aisle of a Boeing 737-900ER at 35,000 feet, and she is, for the first time in a very long time, completely without words. "I've been on the interphone with my senior flight attendant," Daniel continues, quietly and with the precision of a man who does not waste words. "I've heard your behavior described in detail. I've also," and here he pauses with the particular timing of a man who has absolute authority and knows it, "been informed of what you said directly to my daughter. The college kid's phone is definitely recording. Several other phones are recording. Carmen Reyes is standing 2 steps back. James Okafor has appeared from the galley. The man in 14D has both earbuds out. Compass is a registered guide animal," Daniel says. "His documentation is complete and certified. His presence on this aircraft is protected under the Air Carrier Access Act, a federal law. My daughter's right to travel with her guide animal is not negotiable. Your comfort preferences do not supersede federal law." Deborah makes a sound. It might be the beginning of a sentence. "I'm not finished," Daniel says. Not loudly, just clearly. "What you said to my daughter, what you said to an 11-year-old child, has been reported to our in-flight crew and will be documented. You told her she was not that blind and was pretending. Maya lost her sight at age 4 following a medical event. She is not pretending anything." The woman in row 11 says, audibly, "Oh my God! There are 2 air marshals on this flight," Daniel continues. "They are aware of the situation. What happens next depends entirely on your behavior for the remainder of this flight." At this, Deborah finally finds her voice, and the voice she finds is not the voice of someone who has understood their situation. It is the voice of someone who has never in 51 years been forced to understand their situation and still believes this is a conversation she can win. "You cannot intimidate me," she says. "I know my rights. I'll be reporting this to the FAA. You left your cockpit. That's a safety violation. I'll have your license." There are several audible reactions to this from surrounding rows. Daniel looks at her for a moment. "Filing a complaint with the FAA is your right," he says. "I encourage you to do so. I followed emergency welfare protocols in departing the cockpit, documented with crew. You're welcome to include that in your complaint." He pauses. "I'd also suggest including the fact that you harassed a minor and threatened a service animal removal in violation of federal air carrier law. Those details will be relevant. He turns to Carmen. Please document this incident in full for our arrival report. Include the passenger statements, the timeline, and the crew response log. Coordinate with the air marshals. Yes, Captain, Carmen says. Daniel turns back to his daughter. He rests a hand briefly on her head. Maya reaches up and touches his hand. We'll be in Boston in about 90 minutes, he tells her. Compass is great. You're great. He looks at her for a moment. I'll see you at the gate. He straightens. He walks back up the aisle toward the cockpit. He does not look at Deborah again. The cockpit door closes. The cabin holds its breath for about 4 seconds. And then it doesn't. Applause begins in row 17. It spreads forward and back simultaneously with the speed of something that has been waiting to happen. Passengers who have never applauded on an airplane in their lives are applauding. The man in 14D starts clapping. The woman in row 11 is crying slightly. The college kid lowers his phone and joins in. Deborah Kellison is standing in the aisle of a United Airlines Boeing 737-900ER at 35,000 feet, and for the first time in 51 years of operating exactly this way, she is receiving the full and accurate reflection of what the world thinks of her. It arrives at volume, from 287 people, in an enclosed space with nowhere to go. She sits down. She does not speak again for the rest of the flight. The air marshals, 2 of them, seated in 22D and 22E, who have been watching the situation develop with practiced stillness, make their way forward in the final hour of the flight. They speak to Carmen. They speak to James. They review what has been documented. They do not, ultimately, need to restrain anyone, but they sit in the seats across from row 14 for the remainder of the flight, and every time Deborah Kellison shifts in her seat, she can see them. When Flight 2247 touches down at Boston Logan International Airport, it taxis to Gate B22 and the cabin announcement from Marcus Webb, steady, professional, a voice that carries the specific relief of a successful landing, fills the aircraft. Passengers begin gathering their things. The mood in the cabin is unusual, not the flat efficiency of an ordinary arrival. Something warmer. People glancing at row 14A with the small smiles of strangers who have shared something. Carmen kneels beside Maya before the seatbelt sign goes off. She tells her how beautifully she handled herself. Maya thanks her. Compass wags his tail once, politely, in the manner of a dog who has been professionally trained and knows his working hours are not yet over. At Gate B22, 2 things happen within minutes of each other. The first is that 2 Boston TSA officers and a United Airlines gate supervisor board the aircraft and escort Deborah Kellison off before any other passenger has disembarked. She is told that she will be interviewed regarding the federal air carrier complaint filed by the crew. She is told that her United Airlines account has been flagged pending review. She is told that the incident has been documented and reported to the Department of Transportation. She walks up the jetway carrying her bag, and she does not say anything to anyone, and the expression on her face is one that gate agent Trevor in Denver would have recognized. The look of a person who has spent 51 years believing that consequences happen to other people and has just received their first meaningful update to that belief. The second thing that happens is that Captain Daniel Osei, having handed off the aircraft to ground crew and completed his post-flight documentation, walks through the jetway door and onto the gate concourse. Maya hears his footsteps before she sees him, or rather, before she perceives him in the way that is hers. Compass steps forward once. Maya stands. He puts his arms around his daughter in a Boston airport concourse while other passengers from Flight 2247 walk past, and several of them, not all of them but several, slow down or stop briefly, the way people do when they see something that reminds them what this whole project of being human is actually supposed to look like. The documentation filed with the Department of Transportation and the FAA following United Airlines Flight 2247 is thorough and damaging. Deborah Kellison's complaint against Captain Osei is reviewed and dismissed within 72 hours. The crew's documentation of her behavior, supported by multiple passenger accounts and the recorded observations of 2 federal air marshals, results in a formal investigation into her conduct under 49 U.S.C. Section 46504, which covers interference with flight crew and attendants. She is placed on United Airlines' internal no-fly registry, pending the investigation's outcome. Two other major carriers, notified through industry channels, flag her account for review. The video taken by the college student in row 18, a 23-year-old graphic design student named Zach who was flying to Boston for a job interview, is uploaded to social media 40 minutes after landing. It captures Deborah's final confrontation. Daniels walked down the aisle. The moment he says, "That is my daughter," the applause. It does not capture the moment he rests his hand on Maya's head, because Zach had lowered his phone. He later says he put the phone down because it felt private. The video still gets 11 million views in 4 days. The comments, which normally resemble the floor of a carnival haunted house, are in this case almost uniformly human. United Airlines releases a statement acknowledging the incident, confirming that the crew followed proper protocols, and praising Captain Osei and senior flight attendant Carmen Reyes for their handling of the situation. The statement includes a section on the Air Carrier Access Act and service animal protections that reads, "To anyone familiar with how these statements are usually written, like something a lawyer wrote and a human being actually read afterward and approved." Maya and her father receive a personal call from a United senior vice president. The call results in, among other things, complimentary travel for the duration of Maya's medical treatment in Boston, direct line contact with United's accessibility services team, and a